So the first question is, how do you know God is talking to you? Well, the first thing, God is always talking to you. God never stops talking to you. It's a matter if you listen and understand. Do you know how sometimes when people talk to you and they're saying things and someone will say, "Are you listening to me?" Do you ever have that happen? Yes, no? Guys, come on. Yes, no? All right, you've had that happen before. It's the same way with God. Sometimes you get so preoccupied that even a person sitting next to you talking to you, you're not hearing them. Even though you hear them, you don't hear them, right? So you got to always think and listen. What's God's voice sound like? How's he speaking to me today? Second thing is, God tells you to do something. How do you know it's from God? Well, it's a pretty simple test that we know it's from God if it brings God glory. Sometimes you could say something to me and I may think I heard you say one thing, but you really said something else, so I can misunderstand you, can't I? And you do that all the time with each other. No, that's not what I meant this, right? This means yes, this means no, guys. Yes? Yes. All right, well, it's the same thing. Sometimes we misunderstand God when we're trying to listen to him. Sometimes we misunderstand it because we want something and we don't want to do what God wants us to do. We want to do what we want to do. And so we'll hear God that way. If you've been watching any of the politics and how one side always says the other side is horrible and terrible, and then the other side says, no, the other side is horrible and terrible, but it's the same thing they're talking about. You know? I talked about this last weekend about a sermon I gave a few months ago, but just last Sunday, I had some people come up and I was talking about the environment, and some people came up and said I was talking against abortion. How do you get that? People misunderstand other people all the time, and we can misunderstand God. So first thing to know about this question is God's always talking to you. How does God talk to you? Like I'm talking to you? I suppose he could. You know, there are certain times in history where God has spoken directly to people. Moses, right? Burning bush. Mary, the angel came and spoke to her. There are times, however, where God speaks to us through events. Things happen in our life. God speaks to us through other people. When you hear the same message, you say, well, my mom just said that to me, or my friend just told me the same thing. Well, that's a pretty good chance that's not a coincidence, that maybe God's speaking to you through other people. So there's a variety of ways that God can speak to you. The other day, when the snow came and everything looked like a Christmas card, I opened up the door to let the dog out, and it was like, wow, it was so beautiful. It was cold, and I didn't like the idea that I had to go out in the snow, but it was beautiful, and all I could do is say, thank you, God. That was a communication, God talking to us. So God's always speaking to us. Any questions on that? All right. How and why, you're writing, guys. How and why, there's a verb missing. How and why, it says, how and why apostles chosen. Should be how and why are apostles chosen, right? You know that, right? Guys, you're going to make me work like this? I'm going to have you stand up and touch each other's noses. Come on. How are they chosen? Well, Jesus chose the apostles. How does he pick them? Usually for their weakness. For the very thing that you would think they wouldn't be qualified to be apostles. Peter's a prime example. Peter was the last person that someone would have hired for that position. But Jesus is always looking at ways that he can change us, challenge us, and grow us. So Jesus picked the apostles. Now, what are the current day apostles called?
Bishop?
Yes. Now, do you know how bishops are chosen? That's either a yes or no answer. Do you know? So this is how bishops are chosen. There's something called a turnus, which is a list. And on the list there are 3 priest names from every province. So the bishops of every province nominate 3 priests. Then the bishops in the province get together and they decide which 3 priests will be on the turnus, the list. And then they hand that list into the congregation for bishops. And then if the congregation of bishops choose one of the 3 priests, they do an extensive investigation. They look into every aspect of the priest's life, including his physical appearance, his reputation, his ability to speak, and then they send out letters to people that are called, they're so secret that if you tell someone you got one of these letters, you're excommunicated from the church. That's how serious it is. So the letters go out and they ask questions about the priest. They come back and they decide, and then they put 2 names before the Holy Father. And then the Holy Father picks one of them. And that's how people become bishops. All right? Any questions on that? Is this group this quiet in class? No, I didn't think so. Why did God create us? Well, there's a catechism answer for that. Do you know what it is? To know, love, and serve Him. Okay? So we're here on earth to, first of all, know who God is, to love Him, and to serve Him. How do we serve God? By serving each other. All right? So that's why we encourage you to do service projects. That's why we have you study the Catechism to know things about God. And that's why we go to Mass, which should be a time that you express your love for God. Any questions on that? Okay, here's a good question that's very difficult to answer. Why did God create Adam and Eve knowing they would eat from the forbidden tree? Do you think your parents, when they correct you, think that you're never ever going to make a mistake again? Well, if they know you're going to make more mistakes, why don't they just get rid of you? If they know that you're not going to do well in school, even though they yell at you and try to bribe you to do better at school, why don't they just give you up for adoption and try again, try to get somebody that's smarter, more obedient? Yeah, because they love you. So God loves all His creation, even though He knows that we're going to continue making mistakes. Now, just like your mom and dad, when you disappoint your parents, when you make a mistake, you do something that's not right, it hurts them. But unlike your parents, God doesn't get angry. We go through the Old Testament when He used to get angry, and then He promised never to get angry again. So that's why He sent Jesus. So God's plan got messed up by Adam and Eve, and the devil got involved in it. And then God had a second plan. And the second plan was to redeem everybody, to bring everyone back to the paradise that they once knew at the very beginning of time in heaven through Jesus Christ. So that's why we try real hard not to be crummy people and do bad things, use foul language, give our parents or our teachers or our priest a hard time. Okay? We try to be good as we possibly can, knowing that none of us are ever going to get it right all the time. We're going to make mistakes. And then we do that, not taking advantage of the fact that we believe that God will show us mercy, because we don't deserve it. But we do that confident that God is merciful. I don't know if that distinction makes any sense to you. Doesn't? Oh, tell me what you don't understand about it.
How does God forgive us even though, and I get that he loves us, but like, how does he have endless love?
Because he's God. There's no bottom to that pit. There's no end to the bottle on that. It just, God is infinite in his love and his ability to show mercy. And that's something that's really hard for us to understand because we're not made that way. We think very limited terms. So we'll say, I've had enough. I'm not going to be your friend anymore. I don't want to have anything to do with you. We draw lines. God doesn't draw lines. God constantly calls us back, no matter where we're at in our life, no matter what we do. And here's the thing is, why does God do that? Besides that he loves us, what do you do for someone you love? You want the best for them, right? So God knows that if we follow his plan, he's going to give us the very best that's possible. He's going to give you, imagine your best dream, your best fantasy about life, and what you think would make you the happiest person on the face of the earth. God's dream for you is even bigger than that. And so we're often exchanging God's dream for our little dreams, God's huge dreams for our puny dreams, and we settle for so much less than we need. And that's why when you love God and you follow his will and you listen to him and you talk to him in prayer, you tend to be a happier person. I heard confessions yesterday, and I heard over and over people who stopped going to church and how their life is all messed up. No, I've been hearing confessions for 40 years, and I hear the same thing over and over. Of people who don't follow God, who don't try to do God's will, even though they're imperfect and even though they're going to make mistakes, they're not going to end up being happy in life. There's a YouTube thing right now. I mean, would you think the people you guys think are the coolest people would be like ball players and movie stars and singers and stuff like that. They make lots of money and they look beautiful and they have all this fame. And you guys, there was some of it in my time, but not as much as it is today. Those are your gods. Those are the people you look up to, and those are the people you envy. There's a YouTube video. 45 in the last year or two of those people committed suicide. 45 people who were good-looking, talented, rich, and famous, but clearly were not following God, decided there was no reason to live their lives, and they killed themselves. Because without God in your life, there is no meaning or purpose. You think I'm just saying that because I'm a priest, but I'm living it. This is why I'm a priest, is because I know that happiness comes from being in union with God. Even though I know I will mess up over and over and over, but I'm still not going to give up. I'm going to keep trying to follow God. That's where happiness, that's why God constantly calls you from your stupid acts, from your silly things that you do, the nasty words you use, the little fights that you have, your impatience and irritation at your mom and dad and your siblings. Even in all that, God is with you and calling you to come to a better place because he wants you, more than anything, to be happy. Not on your terms, though, on his. All right? Is purgatory a punishment? Another good question. Purgatory is a place of purification. It's a place where, let's see if I can give you an image that would help you. You meet God. When you meet God, absolute truth is apparent to you. Every little nook and cranny, everything that you've justified, everything you said, I did this because, everybody else does it. I did this because they deserve it. I did this because they did this to me. Every single dark spot in your life will be revealed to you instantaneously when you see God face to face. And you will feel horrible. The truth, all the nonsense that we pay attention to, all the games that we play with each other, all the shallow things that we want money and we want big houses and we want fancy clothes and we want the best toys in the world, all that, when you stand face to face with God, will mean absolutely nothing. And the truth will be revealed. And you will see two things. One, how your very essence wants to be with God. How nothing else matters. You want to be with God. And two, how inadequate you are to be with God. Purgatory will be our judgment on our own self. God will not judge us. He will just share with us who we really are. And so purgatory is a place where we spend time contemplating our failures and learning to love God more perfectly. So is that a punishment? To me, a punishment would be to hell, because that's final, complete separation. This is another way for God to reach out, even though we're sinners, and still pull us to himself. Make sense? Okay? No questions on that? Practical question, was Jesus really born on December 25th? No. Most likely he was born sometime in March. Most scholars agree. Why do they choose that date? Because in the early church, what they were trying to do was help people who had strong cultural practices accept Christianity. So it was called the Feast of the Sun, S-U-N, and the Christians adopted that, pulled it to themselves, and turned it into the Feast of the Sun, S-O-N. So culturally, it made it easier for people to be done with paganism and convert to Christianity. And then once that happened, in those days they didn't have the science that we have today. They didn't have the ability to really historical evidence to check on that. It just took a generation or two and that became what always was done. I mean, there was no videos that you could show what it was at one point. So that's how it came about. And there are other things in our Christian faith that are similar to that. That we've embraced the culture that is to help people believe in Christ. You okay with that? Does it matter? No. It does matter? Why does it matter?
So we know the truth.
Pardon?
So we know the truth of when he was born.
No, I suppose if you want to know the truth, but I mean, practically, does it matter what day Jesus was born on or when we celebrate it? Not really. I mean, there are some kids who get born on December 25th. Isn't that crappy? Your birthday and Christmas on one day. So what families do is say, all right, we'll celebrate your birthday in July. So then you get Christmas and you get your birthday like everybody else. Is that wrong? No, it makes sense, okay? Here's a question that really puzzled me when I read it this morning. Why are none of the saints from our time? Who do you think Mother Teresa is? or John Paul II, or Elizabeth Ann Seton. That's close enough to our time. There are plenty of saints in our time. What's the little boy from Mexico is about their age that became a saint?
Jose Sanchez Del Rio.
Yeah, his picture is in my office. He was martyred for the faith when the government of Mexico tried to, they literally walked into churches when priests were saying Mass and shot them, lined up nuns and shot them. And if you practiced the Catholic faith, you were either put in jail or you were shot. That was just in Mexico. What was that, 1800s?
I thought that was early in the 1900s.
Is it the
Yeah,
1900s?
Okay,
Okay, yeah.
trying to get into Mexico or take over Mexico.
So, I mean, that's definitely in our time. Our Lady of Lourdes, Our Lady of Fatima. The Lady of Fatima is 1917, I think. So that's relatively in people's lifetime. They're still alive today. So yeah, saints are, there's no break in the saints. They're still, and you should know that. That's why in your catechism bowl, there are questions about saints. Saints are great people to follow. They're great examples, and they really, if you study them, you'll see some real practical applications in your life today. What missions of the church are the most important? There is many, like disciples who make disciples, evangelize, Beatitudes. Well, when we decided to come up with that slogan, be disciples and make disciples, one of the reasons we did that was because discipleship covers everything. If you're a disciple, then you are definitely an evangelizer. That's what disciples do. They go out and talk about the faith. If you're a disciple, you're living the Beatitudes. And so discipleship kind of like a umbrella that covers all the different missions, that takes in everything. So that's why we decided to use disciples. Okay? Any questions on that? So another question, did you guys have that in class when Jesus was born? That's kind of an odd question to ask. This is the second one that asks if Jesus was born on December 25th. Huh? Why are you smiling? Pardon? What?
Sorry, Father. I just know who wrote it.
He wrote it. So why did you ask that question? I mean, did you guys talk about it in class or anything? Okay. All right. Can priests perform all the sacraments? No. I can perform 6 of the 7 sacraments. What's the sacrament I cannot perform? You want to try? Go on. No, I unfortunately perform lots of marriages. No, I can perform confirmations with permission, yes. Holy orders can ordain, only a bishop can ordain. All right, Andrew, I could use some help on this one. What are some of the ways Catholics relate to science? This is my opinion, okay? I'm going to say very clearly, this is my opinion. Just like we have fake news, we have fake education. So the people who write a lot of the textbooks and to decide to write history, one of the things that they have done repeatedly is to teach people your age about the horrible things that happened at some time with the church, especially in relationship to science. So we persecuted, what was this, Galileo? Persecuted Galileo. There were stories of how we were anti-science. If it weren't for the church, the study of science wouldn't even be close to where it is today. The church was in the forefront of science. It was one of the first to have it study astronomy. When the first idea came across that said that the world was round instead of flat, of course people responded negatively to that. When Darwin came back from the Galapagos and he started his thing about evolution, it was a new idea and a lot of people rejected it. Our problem with Darwin is that he doesn't see that that's part of God's creation, that God created us to adapt to certain ways. If, in fact, and I don't say that I agree with this, but if the global climate crisis is true, and the world is going to heat up, we will adapt. We will adapt in different ways. We'll adapt technologically, of course, but also physiologically, we'll find ways to adapt. So evolution, what the church rejects in evolution is the idea that they don't put God in the picture. You put God in the picture of evolution, it makes perfect sense. You take God out of the picture of evolution, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, just stop and think of the astronomical odds against life existing anywhere, let alone in the abundant variety that it exists on this planet. I mean, imagine if you played the lottery against those odds, would be any hope? You never win, ever, ever, ever. Even now it's hard to win, right? But in those odds, it'd be almost nearly impossible. So who makes the impossible possible? God. So God is at the heart of man's evolution and species on this earth evolution. He built inside of them the ability to adapt over time to different environmental situations. Do you have anything to add to that?
I can add some stuff to with evolution. So he was touching on like politics, how we kind of just throw out certain facts if they go against like what we believe. And science is guilty of a lot of the same things, especially with evolution. For instance, the Miller-Urey experiment, which basically showed that life could have came about from just like water and like nothing, like life came about spontaneously, like it didn't have to have a creator. That experiment was famously debunked because like it couldn't be redone, and part of an experiment is that it has to be able to be redone so the same results can be found again. And once that was proved to false, it basically like broke apart Darwin's theory that like evolution could have existed without a creator. And Darwin also has a lot of holes that a lot of modern science tends to ignore because it goes against what they believe.
Yeah, I think just generally speaking though, science, the church is not opposed to science. And if you were to talk to believers, what's the guy that's on the guy that he mapped the genome? He mapped the genetics of everybody, and he was an atheist when he started. And as he went on, he found out more. He was really revealing some of God's secrets, and he became very aware that there is a God. And so he became a Christian. He's on our Alpha video, the first or second one that we watch.
Yeah. There were a lot of atheist philosophers, like Anthony Flew, who was a super atheist. But once the human genome was like figured out, statistically the odds of there being no God were like super low. So as a logician, he decided to become a believer. But it's interesting because he believed in God, and that's like the first step. Then the second step is believing that God is personal with us. So Anthony Flew, being very hard-hearted, he believed in God but refused to believe in a personal God.
So science, when it's rooted in a belief, works well, and the church has no objection to it. Our objection is not to science per se, it's to the many people who do science who are unbelievers. And their bias against belief in God is played out in their research. For me, one of the biggest things that I just can't get around, and it's scientific, is that people die, have near-death experiences, and come back to life, and they've been to heaven, and they can talk about it. And how do I know that that's even, it's not just like something happens to your optic nerves or something, There's books and books and books about this. One book that I enjoyed reading was a neuroscientist who used to claim that people who had these near-death experiences it was just a sensation of the pressure in their brain until he had a near-death experience. There was another surgeon who had a near-death experience, and while she was dead, she was told her teenage son was going to die in a year. She was told certain things, and so when she came out of the coma, she knew these things, and they all came to be true, and she wrote a book. So there are so many books, so many stories of people. So if there's no God, what's that all about? I mean, how do people have these experiences when they die, whether they're believers or not? Because many of the people who write these books didn't believe in God when they died. How do you explain stuff like that without God? Like so many things in science, how can you really explain them if you don't have a belief in God? So the church has no problem with science, per se science, but we have a problem with science that denies the existence of God. How much time do I have left?
One more question.
Okay. What is the hardest sacrament to learn and administer? Well, it's hard to answer that question because once you learn something, it's easy, right? So I'd have to go back 40 years to figure out. Probably the hardest thing to learn was the Mass because there's so much to it. And there's so many pages you have to turn and do stuff. Some of the hard, but I would say of the sacraments, it brings me great joy, but it also leaves me very drained is the sacrament of reconciliation. When you have to hear the brokenness of so many people's lives. It's hard to hear how messed up people's lives are and be powerless to do much for them except forgive their sins and pray for them. And sometimes you just want to take people and straighten out their lives for them, but you can't do that. So people come and go, and sometimes if they're in the confessional and they're on the other side of the screen, I can't even see them. It's really, really hard because I feel bad. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they're just so badly broken. I just want to have some kind of contact to comfort them and to make them feel better. And there are times you just can't do that. There are times people come in and you feel they really need a hug, but in these days I can't do that. I don't touch anybody because of all the nonsense that goes on in the world today. But there are times that people are just so hurting that I just feel so bad for them. And then for days afterwards, my mind is reeling. So I would say out of all the sacraments, the one that's most difficult, but also one that brings great joy, is the sacrament of reconciliation. Okay, any questions? Guys, you get an F on dialogue, so let's work on that in the future. All right? Questions? Good. You get an A on questions. Not so good on the dialogue. So maybe what we'll do is this is the way that we'll break them into small groups with certain questions, and then they'll come back and then we'll talk like that. All right? All right, guys, thank you.